Ukraine just attacked Russia's biggest oil terminal. While you're watching this, Russia is bleeding, and Putin is furious. Something just happened that could completely change the course of the conflict in Eastern Europe. Ukraine didn't just hit another ordinary military target, it struck right at the heart of Russia's economy. But what you don't know is this wasn't a one-off attack. Over the past few months, Kiev has been running a strategy so effective it's crippling Russia's economy. And the fallout is so devastating it even affects your life. That's right, your life. In the early hours of last Sunday, September 12th, Ukrainian drones flew hundreds of kilometers across Russian territory to carry out one of the boldest ops since the war began. The target, the Primorsk oil terminal, located in the Leningrad region and considered the beating heart of Russia's energy infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. This wasn't just another strike. For the first time in the war, Ukraine managed to completely shut down operations at Russia's biggest oil terminal, forcing a total halt in shipments that normally move $41 million a day. The Primorsk complex processes around 60 million tons of oil annually, representing about $15 billion in revenue for the Kremlin. The op was carried out by Ukraine's security service, SSU, with jaw-dropping precision. The drones didn't just hit poor facilities, they directly damaged two tankers from Russia's shady shadow fleet, the Kusto and the Kai-Yun, both sailing under flags of convenience, Seychelles and Sierra Leone, respectively. The Kusto, an Aframax-class tanker with a capacity of 700,000 barrels of crude, went up in flames during the attack. Images of the blaze were visible for miles, a devastating spectacle that symbolized Russia's vulnerability. The second ship, Kai-Yun, also took serious damage, forcing its crew to evacuate. But the strike went beyond the ships. Ukrainian drones also hit the pumping stations feeding the terminal, sparking multiple fires and forcing Russian authorities to suspend all loading ops. Alexander Drozdenko, governor of Leningrad region, first claimed over 20 drones had been shot down, then later raised that number to more than 30 unmanned aircraft. And it wasn't just Primorsk. Ukrainian drones also hit 3 pumping stations feeding the U.S. Teluga terminal, another strategic Russian oil hub. That level of coordination shows a military planning and execution few experts thought Ukraine had. What makes this attack especially significant is its geography. Primorsk sits just 137 kilometers from St. Petersburg, Russia's second-largest city. The psychological impact of seeing flames so close to a metro of 5 million people can't be overstated. St. Petersburg's Pulkovo Airport was forced to suspend operations during the attack, a measure that's becoming more and more common as Ukrainian strikes ramp up. Russian officials try to downplay the damage, claiming the fires were quickly contained and no oil leaked. But industry sources confirmed loading ops stayed suspended for days, costing Russia's budget an estimated $41 million in daily lost revenue. The choice of targets shows Ukraine's sharp grasp of Russia's economy. Primorsk isn't just some random port, it's the end point of the Baltic Pipeline System, BPS, the network linking Russia's oil fields to global markets. Hitting this choke point sets off a ripple effect through the entire Russian energy chain. The tankers hit, Kusto and Kai-Yun, are part of Russia's scheme to dodge sanctions. Both operate under flags of convenience and often switch off their AIS tracking to avoid detection. Striking them sends a clear message: even Russia's shadow fleet isn't safe in Russian waters. And the timing wasn't random. September traditionally marks the start of peak energy demand in the Northern Hemisphere, when countries start stocking fuel for winter. Cutting Russian exports at this moment maximizes the economic punch, forcing Moscow to choose between supplying international markets or keeping domestic demand covered. The technical sophistication of the op-wowed military analysts worldwide. The drones managed to travel hundreds of kilometers through heavily defended Russian airspace, evade air defenses, and hit specific targets with surgical precision. This proves Ukraine has developed tech and tactics rivaling established military powers. What we're seeing aren't random or desperate attacks. Ukraine has built a sophisticated military strategy aimed squarely at Russian energy infrastructure. This systematic campaign began gaining traction in early 2024 and has already produced stunning results. Just in recent weeks, besides Primorsk, Ukrainian forces hit the Saratov refinery, one of Russia's largest, causing explosions and fires that shut it down entirely. They also struck a key pipeline carrying Russian oil to Hungary and Slovakia, both EU and NATO members, creating a delicate diplomatic mess. The Ukrainian campaign has already cut Russian refining capacity by 17%, forcing Moscow to take measures unseen since the war began. In March 2024, for the first time ever, Russia had to ban gasoline exports to protect its domestic market, a move that laid bare the real vulnerability of its economy. The numbers tell a brutal story for Russia's economy. According to the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, Russian fossil fuel revenues in Q2 2025 dropped 18% compared to the same period last year, the lowest since the invasion of Ukraine began. This slump happened even though Russia managed to export 8% more volume in Q2 than in Q1. In other words, Moscow is selling more oil but making a lot less money, an economically unsustainable situation long-term. Primorsk, specifically, is a keystone in Russia's economic puzzle. Around 60 million tons of oil move through it annually, generating roughly $15 billion. To put that in context, that's nearly 10% of all Russian energy exports. But the impact goes far beyond the numbers. Russia's shadow fleet, made up of aging, often uninsured tankers, relies on Primorsk as its main base. These ships are the backbone of Russia's scheme to skirt Western sanctions, moving oil to buyers willing to ignore restrictions. Moscow responded to the systematic strikes with a series of defensive measures that show both its determination and its strategic limits. The Russian government vowed better protection for refineries after multiple successful Ukrainian drone hits, but the reality on the ground tells a different story. Authorities rolled out a multi-layered defense system. First, they beefed up the deployment of S-400 and Panzer air defense systems around key facilities. Second, they dramatically boosted air patrols near major oil complexes. Third, they created temporary exclusion zones banning civilian flights within 50 kilometers of major refineries. But Russia's continental scale makes it impossible to properly guard more than 400 energy installations spread across 17 million square kilometers. The very vastness of Russian territory, long seen as one of its strengths, is now being turned by Ukraine into its biggest weakness. The strategic bind Moscow faces is unprecedented in modern military history. Analysts estimate Russia has redeployed about 40% of its mobile air defense systems from the front lines to protect civilian infrastructure. That means Russian troops in the field now fight with weaker air cover, gaps Ukraine has been exploiting systematically. The forced military reshuffle goes beyond shifting gear. Russia had to create a brand new military division dedicated to protecting energy infrastructure, pulling around 15,000 troops from active combat units. Those soldiers who should be fighting on the front are now guarding refineries and oil terminals. Russian authorities even installed loudspeakers in multiple cities telling citizens not to film Ukrainian drones, a tacit admission that strikes are hitting regularly and that propaganda about falling debris causing damage doesn't match reality. But Russia has also hit back. Right after Ukraine's first wave of drone strikes, Russia used 2 ballistic missiles to strike Ukraine's only functioning refinery in Kremenchuk, then went back to systematically pounding Ukrainian thermal and hydropower plants. This retaliation strategy, though, exposed another core problem. Russia doesn't have the same precision strike ability Ukraine has developed. While Ukrainian drones are nailing specific targets with surgical accuracy, Russian missiles often cause collateral damage in civilian areas, drawing international condemnation and boosting Western support for Kyiv. The economic hit from defense spending is becoming unsustainable too. Russian energy insiders estimate security costs have soared 340% since the systematic strikes began. Each refinery now requires $50 to $80 million in defensive systems, money siphoned away from maintenance and upgrades. Frustration inside Russia's military machine is visibly mounting. Leaked intercepts show regional commanders complaining it's impossible to properly protect all critical facilities with the resources available. Some even suggest the only solution is to eliminate the source, a reference to Ukraine's drone bases, but that would take long-range ops Russia has consistently failed to pull off. The vulnerabilities exposed go beyond the military. The strikes have shown that Russia's economy, built for decades around energy exports, has created single points of catastrophic failure. Ukraine has hit at least a dozen refineries inside Russia, many of which supplied Russian military units directly, creating fuel shortages for the armed forces themselves. The psychological effect can't be understated either. Every successful strike on Russian soil chips away at the Kremlin's narrative of invincibility. When St. Petersburg residents see flames on the horizon from Ukrainian strikes, the war stops being some distant special operation and becomes a threatening domestic reality. Russia's diplomatic response has been just as weak. Moscow keeps appealing to the world about terrorist attacks on civilian infrastructure, but those pleas fall flat given Russia itself launched the war by systematically hitting Ukraine's civilian infrastructure. The result is a vicious cycle where every defensive measure Russia takes exposes new weaknesses. The more troops it assigns to guard refineries, the weaker it is on the battlefield. The more air defense it pulls from the front lines, the more open it is to conventional attacks. And the more money it sinks into infrastructure security, the less it has for offensive military ops. Ukraine's campaign against Russian oil infrastructure marks a major evolution in modern warfare. Instead of only going after traditional military targets, Kyiv is hitting what really keeps Russia's war machine going. It's funding. And the strategy is working. Military analysts estimate every dollar Russia loses in energy revenue directly reduces its ability to sustain prolonged military operations. Funding gear, paying soldiers, maintaining weapon systems, all of it depends on those energy dollars. The international community is watching this new phase of the war closely. Countries still trading with Russia are starting to question the security and reliability of Russian energy supplies. That erosion of trust could have long-term consequences far more devastating than the strikes themselves. Global oil markets have reacted with growing jitters to the systematic strikes on Russian infrastructure. While prices haven't spiked dramatically thanks to alternate supplies, volatility has shot up. Energy analysts warn that if the campaign keeps up, it could create localized shortages of refined products, especially diesel and gasoline, in regions historically dependent on Russian supplies. Asian countries, now Russia's main oil buyers after Western sanctions, are already diversifying their sources as a precaution. The situation is also fast-tracking investment in renewables and diversification of national energy mixes. Countries that once delayed energy transitions now see them as matters of national security, not just environmental policy. The escalation of strikes on Russian energy infrastructure shows we've entered a new phase of the war, where the economic battlefield may prove just as decisive as conventional military ops. Russia's financial ability to sustain its war effort is being stress-tested like never before. Energy security experts sketch different scenarios for the coming months. In the conservative one, continued strikes could cut Russia's refining capacity by up to 25% by the end of 2025. In the more aggressive one, critical hubs like Primorsk could be knocked completely offline, forcing Russia to rethink its entire economic and military strategy. The psychological impact matters too. Every successful strike proves Russian territory isn't untouchable, undermining domestic narratives of military superiority. For a population raised on myths of Russian invincibility, every explosion on home soil is a crack in their trust in the regime. What we're witnessing isn't just another chapter in the Russia-Ukraine war. It's a live demonstration of how smaller nations can use tech and strategy to neutralize the traditional advantages of bigger powers. The strike on Primorsk and the systematic campaign against Russian energy infrastructure mark a strategic turning point that could decide the war's outcome. For the first time since the invasion began, Russia finds itself truly on the defensive, scrambling to protect assets on its own turf. The implications go way beyond the battlefield. The global energy market, international diplomacy, and the future of energy security worldwide are all being reshaped by these seemingly local strikes. One thing's for sure, the world is watching closely how this new form of asymmetric warfare might shape future conflicts. What happened at Primorsk isn't just about Russian oil, it's about how the rules of the game have changed for good. And while the fires at the Russian oil complex are still smoldering, one question hangs in the air. How far can Ukraine push this strategy before Russia is forced to fundamentally rethink its position in the war? The answer may come in the next few weeks, as we see whether Moscow can adapt its defenses, or if it'll be dragged into an unsustainable economic reality. The battle over Russian oil has just begun, and its consequences could decide not only the end of this war, but the future of the world's energy balance.